Welcome back into the Blacksburg Buzz. Today, we're starting off a new series where we're going into a deep dive of every single Virginia Tech football game coming up in this 2024 season. We're going to be breaking down each and every game in a multi-part series. Pretty big endeavor that we're launching into, talking about all the players you need to be on the lookout for, what I expect from every opponent, what their key to success might be, and how I think Virginia Tech is going to fare, and what we need to be, what needs to happen to get the win in these games. But before we get started, let's talk about today's video sponsor, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. From the preseason NFL to college kicking off, BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner take all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today and use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, and get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. So, to start things off, Virginia Tech is opening up the season at Vanderbilt. They were 2-10 last year. They really struggled in the SEC. They had wins against Hawaii and Alabama A&M last season, starting 2-0 before 10 straight losses. Now, obviously, this Vanderbilt team, they've got it pretty tough as a low-end SEC team, and obviously, they've really struggled. Wake Forest and UNLV were their only other non-conference games, both of which were losses, and Wake Forest wasn't particularly close either at 36-20. UNLV was a little bit closer, lost just 37-40, a 3-point loss. But besides those, the next closest game for Vanderbilt was 31-15 against Auburn, a 16-point loss at home. Now, I don't really see this Vanderbilt team being particularly better than last season. I'd be very impressed if they got to 4 wins. I'm expecting probably 2 out of them, but 3 I don't think would be out of reach. With those wins, they're probably going to come against one of 3 opponents: Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. So they're probably looking at 2 to 3 this season unless they get some dramatic improvements, but that's probably not something that's on the table for this team. I'm expecting it to be a pretty big win for Virginia Tech to open things off in this 2024 season. My prediction would be 2+ scores for the Hokies. I really think they're going to come out hot and they're going to have a great start to this year. Brent Pry has been prepping them for a while. They've been locked in on this Vanderbilt game for quite some time, and everything that I've seen coming out of practice, it has my expectations pretty high. They've been practicing on identical turf to Vanderbilt's field out in the sun at a couple different locations at the university. And with a mostly consistent and identical team from last season, plus you add in a few big additions and a couple of, key contributors coming back from injury, I really don't think a slow start is on the table for this Hokies team. It happened last year where, start a little bit slow, but Drones wasn't starting, and it took a little bit to get everything clicking, but once it did, I really expect it to carry over into this season. I mean, you're looking at a mostly identical team, and then just a couple level ups in a few positions. In terms of Vanderbilt, I really think Vandy's only shot is they have got to hold up defensively strong and keep the score low and then just run the ball. They've really got to excel in the run game, which would allow them to open up the passing game a little bit. But with Virginia Tech, they've got a great passing defense. And I think Vandy's really going to have to run the ball well, and they've got to keep it low on the scoreboard, or else I don't think there's any chance whatsoever for this team. Couple of players to look out for. would be the defense. Supposedly, this defense should be a little bit improved from last year. It was pretty rough as a whole. Statistically, 454.9 average yards per game, 6.5 average yards per play, 47% third down conversion rate for opponents, 71.4% fourth down conversion rate, and they let in 36 points per game. So the defense struggled a little bit, but they do have one key safety, CJ Taylor, one of the best in the conference and the country. He has been great for them at defending the pass, so he's going to have to excel against this Virginia Tech team if they want to keep the score low. In addition, obviously, they're going to have to put some points on the board because even if you slow Virginia Tech down, I think the offense is going to have enough oomph to put 2-3 touchdowns on the board. So you got to get things moving. They've got a completely different offense from last season. A lot of New Mexico State staff, Tim Beck and Jerry Kill coming in. We're expecting a little bit more of a run-heavy game from this Vandy team, but it's still going to really have to start with the quarterback. Diego Pavia is a great runner. He's got a solid arm, but it's not going to blow you away. But with his legs, we could really see some stuff open up for this team. A 10-win season under his lead last year at New Mexico State, almost 3,000 passing yards, 26 passing touchdowns, with his 1,000 rushing and 7 rushing touchdowns. He's really the key for this team. The receiving room, it's somewhat weak, and Pavia's legs are going to have to do a lot of work to move these chains with those weak receivers. He's really going to have to handle the pressure, land those short passes, and just make sure they keep slowly marching down the field. I don't think this is going to be the most explosive team. I don't think this is going to be the most consistent offensive team. But if Pavia can keep things moving with his legs, just get a few yards here or there whenever he's in a crunch, and then complete some easy passes for short gains, they could put some on the board. Another guy to look out for is his tight end, Eli Stowers. He was a quarterback prospect originally, but he got beat out and he switched into a tight end role. 35 receptions for 366 yards and 2 touchdowns last season with Pavia at the quarterback position. So I think that duo is really going to have to get it moving on the offensive side if Vandy wants a shot at this game. You'd like to start 1-0 for Vanderbilt after a 2-0 start to last season, but on a 10 losing streak, that's pretty tough. So, they'd like to break that. Obviously, they've seen quite a bit of turnover on this team, bringing in a lot of new guys, pulling from New Mexico State, bringing in a bunch of their staff and several of their players as well. So we could see this team be a little bit better, but with such a tough schedule for them and, a history of not much success, I really don't expect us to get anything all too crazy out of Vanderbilt. And that's why I've got a pretty solid win for the Hokies. Once again, as I said earlier, I'm calling 2+ scores. So after this Vanderbilt game, I've got Virginia Tech headed into the home opener against the Marshall Thundering Herd at a 1-0 record. Marshall was 6-7 last year, pretty decent season overall. They started 4-0 with Albany, ECU, Virginia Tech, and Old Dominion. They also defeated Georgia Southern and Arkansas State later in the season, but a 4-0 start, just right around that 500 mark. That's a pretty decent season for Marshall. They've got some pretty tough games on the schedule this year, particularly Virginia Tech and Ohio State. Those two really stand out, but there's also some tough ones as well. App State, Coastal Carolina, JMU. They're going to be fighting for some wins this year. The over-under for Marshall is generally set at 5.5, so they're going to be right on the fringe of getting into a bowl game. They're really going to be fighting for it there, and honestly, I think they've got a pretty good shot at it. But similarly to Vanderbilt, this is a game that Virginia Tech should win and should win handily. Obviously, we have to mention that VT lost last year at Marshall, but this team should be so much better after a year of work. That was only game two of Kyron Drones, still figuring out the offense, getting settled in with the team. After Marshall, that's where things really started to pick up outside of that Louisville game where the Hokies only scored 3 points, but that was a top ranked opponent, and Louisville was a very, very good team last year. So that's not really outside of insane. But it took a little bit, kind of got moving after Marshall. And with Virginia Tech coming back, they're bringing that momentum from late in last season. Once again, I don't think they're going to have a slow start. I don't think they're going to have a problem with this Marshall team. Last season, Charles Huff's team held opponents to just under 29 points per game, and they've got a pretty solid secondary, which limited the passing attack fairly well. I believe they're 62nd in the country in terms of the passing defense. 32% completion rate on third down, 43% conversion rate on fourth down, under 50% red zone touchdown. That's pretty decent for this group. Defense, it struggled a lot in the second quarter, though. That really stood out to me. They allowed 150 points during the second quarter on the season. But at the same time, the offense picked up the slack really well with 101 in the second quarter. That was really where everything was moving well for this Marshall team on the offensive side, but it's also where the defense saw the most trouble. And it makes sense in a lot of ways. Sometimes, the first quarter, you're still getting comfortable with the opponent. You're trying to figure out how they're doing, and, your offense is getting warmed up. So I'm not surprised seeing some more points on the board in the second quarter, but pretty significant drop off into the third, and then very, very few in the fourth quarter. So that does worry me a little bit, just the drop off there from second to third to fourth. That could be tough in the late game if it's anything close. Marshall wasn't a great team at scoring in the fourth quarter, and that could play into the game very importantly. In addition, they had a decent offensive passing game under Cam Fancher last year, but now he's at Florida Atlantic. 6.9 yards per attempt and 11 yards per catch. But without Fancher, it's going to be a little bit tough. There's probably two different guys who we could see at quarterback. Unsure of who's really going to get that starting role. I'm leaning towards Cole Pennington, but Braylon Braxton seems to be the better quarterback in some ways, although he had a really rough season last year. But to start off with Cole Pennington, from what I can tell, there's not a ton of belief in this guy overall. He had some really tough numbers last year as the backup quarterback, and he was the only one who saw significant work on the field besides Fancher, who is obviously the go-to. 57% completion rate, 98.6 efficiency, 0 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. That is pretty rough through his 4 games. He started 3 of the last 4 games in the season, attempted 112 passes. That was about 1/3 of Fancher's attempts, so a pretty significant number there. This isn't just, he had 6 or 7 throws and he had a, 57% completion rate and a 98 passer rating. He had 112 attempts. So he got some decent time out there on the field. I mean, starting 3 of the last 4 games, he's got some experience out there, but he had a tough year, 0 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. That's not what you want to see out of a guy who could potentially be the starter this year. And in addition to that, he doesn't really have great legs either. Negative yardage on the ground for the season, negative 69 over the course of the year. So, you got a guy who doesn't have phenomenal legs. He's getting caught behind the line of scrimmage quite a bit for some negative yardage, and not a great passer as of last year, at least. We could see him take some big steps forward, but going off of last year's numbers, just really struggled out there overall. And, he's going to be a guy to watch whether he really excels and takes a couple steps forward, whether he's on the bench or whether he has a very, very tough game and throws a few more picks. You never really know what's going to happen, but Cole Pennington is definitely going to be one of the key players for this group. And then the other quarterback that I mentioned, Braylon Braxton, he was quite frankly awful last season. 69 passer rating in 6 games, 44% completion, 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions on 50 attempts. He had a lot less than Pennington did, but those numbers are very rough as well. If you're completing less than half of your passes, that's really bad. In 2022, though, he was really good. A 132 passer rating in 9 games, 56% completion rate, 10 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. So he had a good season in 2022. 23 was just not his year. Could he bounce back this year with Marshall, get that starting job, and lead them to some more wins? I don't know. It's tough to read because you have a really good year and then you have a really bad year. We've kind of seen that Braylon Braxton could be really anything with this team. Kind of an unknown commodity in some ways, but there's one thing we do know: he's probably a better runner than Pennington. He's got some good legs on him, and that could play into this game a lot if he keeps things moving. Obviously, having legs as a quarterback can help you throw a little bit better. You can get out of some jams, keep yourself in a little bit better position, and just having the ability to, you know, get out of a potential sack opportunity for the defense and getting 2, 3, 4 yards. That can be huge for a team. That's, the difference between a second and long and a third and short, right? You go from a second and long where you might get sacked. Now you're at, third and 10 versus you get those 4 yards and, say you're at a third and 2. That's pretty manageable right there. Braylon Braxton's legs, they're going to be important for this team if he does end up in that starting role, if he does get significant minutes and significant snaps. He's really going to have to, use those legs to his advantage and use a couple of good receivers that we're going to talk about. A transfer from Middle Tennessee and another wide receiver who could be poised for a pretty solid year. But two quarterbacks, not sure who really is going to get the starting job. You've got one guy who probably has a lot higher upside in Braxton, but you've got Cole Pennington who knows the system. He's been around, and, if he's anything like his dad and he can pull that out and figure things out, he could be really good as well. So it's going to be, I'm curious to see who gets this starting role. I think we'll probably know after week 1 and we see whoever starts week 1's performance. I think we'll have a good idea of who we're going to see in week 2 against Marshall. But at this point, this far out from then with, camp still going on, it really could be anybody. Now, before we get into those receivers and the running backs, I do want to talk about a couple defensive players. Michael Green and Tyke's legs. Those guys put up some big numbers. They cause a lot of issues for offenses. I think those two are probably poised to be some big pressure guys on this defense. Marshall has, they've led to some very, very solid defenders. They've coached some great guys on defense that have made it up to the next level. And these two guys could be some of them later on down the line. They both had a ton of tackles and probably going to be more of the same this season. Those two really just create a lot of pressure. And, it's tough on a quarterback, but with Drones' legs as well, and being a solid passer, and of course, developing significantly as a passer over last season, and I'm sure taking steps in the offseason, Michael Green and Tyke's legs are going to have to be breaking through that offensive line and putting some pressure on Drones if Marshall wants a shot at this game. Another defender, J.J. Roberts, the safety, he had 2 interceptions, 73 tackles. He was one of the reasons and one of the main reasons that Marshall's passing defense was 62nd. So he's going to be a key in this one. Virginia Tech has a lot of great wide receivers. They've got a deep receiving room and a lot of threats out there and a lot of big threats too. J.J. Roberts is going to need to have a great game, get some tackles, have a lot of passes defended successfully if Marshall wants to win this game, and keep Virginia Tech from going 2-0 from my predictions. Now, moving back to the offensive side, let's talk about the receivers and the running backs. Elijah Metcalf, wide receiver, transfer from Middle Tennessee, 54 receptions last year, 634 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 11.7 yards per catch. He is definitely going to be one of the guys to watch on this offensive side. Him and DeMarcus Harris are both two explosive threats for this Marshall team. If the quarterbacks can get things figured out, I think they've got two great weapons right here in Metcalf and Harris. Harris had 16.5 yards per catch last season, only 24 receptions. So if they can get the ball moving through the air and get a lot of targets to these two guys, they could have two big seasons individually. And they could also lead to a lot of wins. They're going to be explosive when you get the ball to them. I mean, you look at these numbers, 16.5 yards per catch. You get to Marcus Harris the ball, he's probably getting you a first down, if not more. So Virginia Tech's passing defense is going to have to be on point in this game, assuming Marshall's quarterbacks are throwing the ball accurately and their offensive line is holding up and giving them time to do so. Now, the running back group, this one is going to be very interesting. There's 3 guys really fighting it out during camp. And at this point, I've watched a couple of interviews. It seems like there's probably going to be a mix of all 3 is the indication early in camp. They all do different things better. And so as long as they're staying consistent and playing to their strengths, I really expect all 3 of them to see significant snaps depending on what's working in the moment in that game and depending on just the play call. So that's really interesting there, just that running back room. You got those 3 guys that are just duking it out, and I honestly think we're going to see all 3 of them. They've got their strengths. They do a lot of things well. They've been catching passes in the backfield well, and, you've got different receiving threats right there. You've got your, linear runner. You've got your power runner. They all do different things, and I think depending on what's working, we're going to see all 3 of them, and then there's probably going to be a workhorse each week, at least for the first couple of weeks, a different guy whose just game is on that day and the defense is having trouble with. But other than that, I think it's going to be a committee back there between Jordan Houston, A.J. Turner, and Ethan Payne. So those 3 are going to certainly be guys that the Hokies are going to have to watch out for because they've got so many options, because those options have so many different strengths. You can really run the ball each and every way, and that's tough on a defense. But if you can get a good read on who does what the best and, get a good idea of, okay, Houston's coming in, this is probably what's going to happen. Okay, Turner's coming in, going to expect this. Payne, he's probably going with this type of play. If you can get a good read on that and, be aware of what's happening there with the running backs and, just get a good read, get good predictions and call the right plays on defense, see the gaps well, it could be their downfall as well because, if you know exactly what this running back is going to do, they're probably not going to be very effective at it. So all in all, I've got Virginia Tech starting the season 2-0, a big win against Vanderbilt and a big win against Marshall as well in the home opener. It's definitely going to be a fun season, and we are almost there. Just a few more days left until that first kickoff against Vanderbilt, and boy, am I excited. So make sure you stay tuned. We're going to keep breaking down each and every game, probably going to go 2 at a time. So several parts in this schedule deep dive. And I've also got an interview with Will Trent coming up. He played a huge part in the War Memorial renovations. He designed, I believe, all the graphics located throughout the building, and boy, does it look phenomenal. Got my first workout in a few days ago over there, and it is a great gym, probably the best gym I've ever been to. I think I can say pretty comfortably, and it looks great. And a lot of that is due to Will Trent. So I've got him coming on the podcast to talk to him a little bit more about the process and giving some insights into what inspired him to go different ways with all these graphics and why he designed, the walls and the murals and the quotes and the paintings and whatnot, why he designed them and went the way he decided to with it. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that because it's a great building. And, I know people are curious to see what it looks like inside and to know a little bit about, why did it take so long and what are the students going to enjoy about that. So got Will Trent coming on, and stay tuned for some more scheduled deep dives.